The Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation by Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. An unofficial reading by Emm Wilde. Book 2. Chapter 8. The Stalk of Grass. Part 2. A gust of sinister wind had blown in out of nowhere and pushed the door to the small room open a crack. It swung open and closed intermittently. It was pitch black inside the room, and they could only vaguely see a hunched shadow sitting next to a table. Wei Wuxian gestured for them not to move and walked into the room himself. The light of the oil lamp and the candles from the center of the room seeped inside. The old lady had her head bowed, as if she hadn't noticed anyone come in. There was a piece of cloth in her lap, tied taut to an embroidery frame. She appeared to be doing needlework. Her hands were stiffly pressed together as she tried to poke a thread through a needle. Wei Wuxian seated himself next to the table. "Granny, why not turn on the light so you can thread your needle?" "Let me." He took the needle and the thread and fixed it in no time. Then he returned them to the old lady and walked out of the room like nothing was the matter, closing the door behind him. "Leave her be," he said. "Did you check if the old witch was alive or dead when you went in just now?" Jinling asked. "Don't call her an old witch, it's rude," Wei Wuxian chided. "That old lady is a living corpse." The boys exchanged looks of dismay. Lan Sijui asked, "What's a living corpse?" "A living corpse is when an individual has all the characteristics of a corpse, from head to toe, but the person themselves is still alive." Jinling was greatly alarmed. "You're saying she's still alive?" "Did you guys see inside the room just now?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Yes." "Well, what did you see? What was she doing?" "Threading a needle." "Did she succeed?" No. "That's right, she didn't. The muscles of the dead are stiff, so complicated actions such as threading a needle are impossible. Those aren't age spots on her face, but rather livor mortis. And she doesn't need to eat, but she can still breathe, so she's alive." Lan Sijui said, But this granny's very old. Many old ladies have poor eyesight and can't thread needles by themselves." "Which is why I did it for her," Wei Wuxian said. "But did you guys notice something else? In the time between opening the front door and now, she hasn't blinked a single time." The youths themselves blinked. The living blink to prevent their eyes from drying out, but the dead don't need to do that, Wei Wuxian explained. "And when I threaded the needle, did anyone notice how she looked at me?" Jinling answered, "She didn't move her eyes. It was her whole head that turned." "That's it exactly," Wei Wuxian said. "Usually when you look in a different direction, your eyes move at least a little. But the dead don't do the same. Since they can't manage minor actions like moving their eyeballs, they can only move their entire head and neck." Lan Jingyi was dazed. "Should we be taking notes?" "It's a good habit to have," Wei Wuxian stated. "But when will you have the time to flip through your notes during a night hunt? Use your brain. Memorize it." Jinling gritted his teeth. "Walking corpses are crazy enough. Why is there such a thing as a living corpse?" Wei Wuxian answered, "Living corpses are rarely formed naturally. They usually are deliberately made, like this one is." "Deliberately? Why?" "The dead have many shortcomings," Wei Wuxian lectured. "Stiff muscles, slow movements, and so on. But they have their advantages too. They don't fear pain, they can't think, and they're easy to control. Some people think those shortcomings can be improved upon, and that by doing so, they can construct the perfect puppet. That's where the concept of living corpses comes from." While the boys didn't blurt it out, their faces were already boldly written with an obvious sentiment. That person must be Wei Wuxian. Wei Wuxian didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. "But I've never made such a thing," he thought, although it did indeed sound like his style. All right, it was Wei Wuxian who started the trend, but he successfully refined Wen Ning, that is, the ghost general, he said. To be honest, I always wondered who came up with the nickname the Ghost General. It's so stupid. Anyways, others tried to mimic him, but could only produce poor imitations at best. They ended up going down a deviant path to set their eyes on the living instead, coming up with living corpses like this, he concluded. They're failed replicas. At the mention of Wei Wuxian's name, Jinling's expression grew cold. He humped. Wei Ying was a deviant himself. Yeah, so those who make living corpses are extra deviant, Wei Wuxian agreed. Mo Chanbei, what should we do now? Lan Sijue asked. Some living corpses might not know that they're already dead, Wei Wuxian said. I see that old lady is one of those who hasn't figured it out yet, so it'll be fine if we refrain from bothering her for now. Just then, there was a sudden series of crisp taps, the sound of bamboo hitting the ground. It sounded like it was outside the nearby window, which was sealed by black boards. The faces of the clan juniors in the center room turned pale. Having been constantly harassed by that sound since entering the city, they began panicking upon hearing it. Wei Wuxian motioned for them not to make a sound. They held their breath and watched as he stood next to the window, peering through an incredibly thin crack between the planks of the door. At first, all he saw was white. He thought it was because the fog outside the house was too thick, leaving nothing visible. But then, the white rapidly shrank away. It was a pair of savagely white eyes, currently glaring fiercely through the crack in the door. All the white that he'd seen hadn't been miasma, but this pair of eyes, which completely lacked pupils. Jinling and the others' hearts were pounding, terrified that he would suddenly be struck by disaster and fall, clutching his eyes. They heard Wei Wuxian let out an "Ah!" and their hearts jumped into their throats, their hair standing on end. What is it? Wei Wuxian whispered in the teeniest voice, Shh! Don't speak. I'm looking at it. Jinling hushed his voice to be even tinier than Wei Wuxian's. Then what did you see? What's out there? Wei Wuxian neither moved his eyes nor gave a direct answer. Yup. Amazing. Wow. His profile was filled with delight. The praise and awe that he had expressed seemed to come sincerely from the bottom of his heart, and the clan juniors' curiosity rapidly overtook their nervousness. Lan Sijue couldn't help but ask, Mo Xiangbei, what's so amazing? Yeah, it's so interesting. Keep it down, don't scare it away. I'm not done looking. Wei Wuxian shushed them. Move, I want to see, Jinling said. Me too. You really want to see this? Wei Wuxian asked. Yeah. Wei Wuxian slowly shuffled away, acting incredibly reluctant. Jinling was the first to go over. Lining himself up with the thin crack in the wood, he peeked out. Light had fallen by now. Nights here tended to be chilly, but surprisingly, the evil miasma circulating in Yi City had dispersed quite a bit. They could now see at least a few dozen meters of the street. Jinling peered out for a moment, but didn't see anything amazing or so interesting. A little disappointed, he thought, could I have scared it away when I spoke just now? Just as he had that thought, a scrawny, emaciated figure appeared in a flash. Jinling felt shivers scramble up to his head and explode. He almost screamed out loud, but for some reason the burst of energy caught in his chest. He forced it down and stiffly remained in his bent pose, waiting for the numbing sensation to pass. Despite himself, he stole a glance at Wei Wuxian. The despicable man was leaning against the window boards with the corner of his mouth curled up. He wiggled his eyebrows at Jinling and smirked. Isn't it very interesting? Jinling shot him a death glare, knowing full well that he was messing with them on purpose, and replied through gritted teeth, Yeah. Then his mind changed path, and he straightened up, putting on an air of disinterest. It's only so-so, barely interesting. He backed off to the side, waiting for the next fool. With the two of them taking turns at deception, the rest had their curiosity stoked as high as it would go. Lan Sijue couldn't restrain himself. He went to stand in the same spot, but just as he placed his eyes over the crack, he let out a candid "Ah!" and jumped back, his face full of helpless fear. He spun around twice, disoriented, before he found Wei Wuxian and lamented his feelings. Mo Chanpei, outside, there's a... Wei Wuxian replied understandingly. That, right? Don't tell. There'll be no more surprise if you tell. Let everyone else see for themselves. As if anyone else dared to go up after seeing the terrified state Lan Zizhui was in. What surprise? Scare was more like it, and thus they all waved him off. No, it's fine. We're not looking. Jinling clicked his tongue. Tricking people for fun at a time like this? What are you thinking? Weren't you in on it too? Wei Wuxian said. Don't imitate your uncle's tone. Zizhui, was that thing just now scary? Lan Zizhui nodded and replied honestly, Yes. Scary is right, Wei Wuxian said. This is a fantastic opportunity to further your training, you know. Why do ghosts scare people? Because when people are scared, their will falters and their primordial spirit becomes agitated. That's when it's easiest to drain their yang energy. So creatures like ghosts are more fearful of the brave. Since the brave are fearless, they can't do anything to them or take advantage of them. Which is why, as clan juniors, your first priority is to strengthen your courage. Lan Jinyi was glad that he couldn't move, and therefore hadn't gone over to peep out of curiosity. Still, he grumbled, Courage is innate. Some people are born chickens. What can you do? Were you born knowing how to fly on a sword? Wei Wuxian questioned. Didn't you practice over and over until you got good at it? Same logic. Get scared again and again, and you'll eventually get used to it. Toilets stink, right? They're gross, right? But trust me, if you lived in toilets for a month, you'd be able to eat in there without issue. The boys were aghast at the very thought, and refuted him in chorus. Nope, we don't believe you. It's just an example, Wei Wuxian said. All right, I admit that I've never lived in a toilet before, so I don't know if you'd actually be able to eat in there. That one is an irresponsible remark. But with that thing out there, you guys have to try. Don't just look. You have to examine it. Scrutinize the details, and as quickly as you can, use those details to unearth any weaknesses that it might hide. Remain steady in the face of danger and find an opportunity to strike back. Okay, I've lectured this long. Do you all understand? People don't often have the chance to hear me lecture, you know. You have to cherish this opportunity. Don't back away now. Come over and form a line. Take turns. Do we have to? Of course, Wei Wuxian said. I am never one to joke around, nor do I play tricks on people. Let's start with Jinyi. Jinling and Zizhui already both had their turns. Huh? Lan Jinyi protested. I can be excused, right? Those who are poisoned can't move, and that's what you said. Wei Wuxian directed, Stick out your tongue. Ah. Lan Jinyi complied once more. Wei Wuxian gave him his blessing. Congratulations, you're cured of the poison. Now bravely take your first step. Come on. Lan Jinyi balked. Cured that fast? You're lying, right? His protests were ineffective, and so he had to force himself to boldly walk to the window. He looked, then looked away, looked, and looked away. Wei Wuxian knocked on the wooden plank. What are you scared of? I'm standing right here. It won't dare break through this board. It's not going to eat your eyeball. Lan Jinyi jumped away. I'm done. Then came the turn for the next person in line. Once everyone had taken their turn, Wei Wuxian said, All done? Then why don't each of you share what you saw? Let's summarize. Jinling rushed to answer first. White eyes, female, very short, very skinny. Okay appearance, and she's holding a bamboo pole. Lan Zizhui thought for a moment and then said, The girl's head reaches about my chest. Her clothes are ragged and not clean, kind of like the garb of a wandering street urchin. The bamboo pole seems to be a cane used by the blind. It's possible that those white eyes were not formed after death, but rather that she was blind while alive. Wei Wuxian commented, Jinling saw a lot, but Zizhui saw details. Jinling pursed his lips. Another boy said, "The girl is about 15 or 16 years old. She has a heart-shaped face, very delicate and pretty, but there's a sense of vitality in those fine features. She uses a wooden hairpin to pin back her long hair. The end of the pin is carved into the face of a little fox. She's small, yet slender. Although unclean, she's not repellently filthy. If she was just given a chance to clean up, she'd definitely be cute. A real beauty." When Wei Wuxian heard this, he instantly felt that the boy's prospects were limitless. Very good, he praised energetically. "A detailed observation with a unique focus. Our little friend is definitely going to be a romantic in the future." The youth blushed, covered his face, and turned to face the wall, ignoring his companion's laughter. Another youth said, "It seems the sound of bamboo hitting the ground was her walking. If she's already blind when alive, she's still unable to see after turning into a phantom in death. She is already dependent on the cane." Yet another youth continued, "But that's not right. You've all seen the blind people before, right? Since their sight is hindered, they walk and move very slowly, scared to bump into something. But the phantom outside the door is quick and agile. I've never seen such an agile blind person." Wei Wuxian smiled. That's an excellent point. Very good. That's exactly how you should be analyzing the situation. Don't overlook any point of suspicion. Now, let's invite her in to clear up those suspicions with answers." Just as he said that, he immediately tore off one of the door planks. Not just the boys inside the house, but also the phantom outside the window jumped in surprise at the abrupt action. She raised her bamboo pole immediately on guard. Wei Wuxian began by greeting the phantom. Then he asked, "Miss, you've been following them for all this time. Do you have some business with them?" That girl widened her eyes. If she were alive, she would have been absolutely adorable. But with those blank white eyes exuding streams of blood, the motion just made her look doubly savage. Someone inhaled sharply behind Wei Wuxian. Wei Wuxian said, "What's there to be scared of? You'll see plenty of bleeding from the 7 apertures in the future. If 2 apertures is already too much for you, that's why I'm telling you guys to practice more." Prior to this, the girl had been fretfully pacing in circles before the window, hitting the ground with her bamboo pole, stomping, glaring, and flailing her arms. But now she suddenly changed course, gesturing like she wanted to tell them something. Jinling wondered, "That's weird. Can't she talk?" The phantom girl paused mid-action at this and opened her mouth to show them. Blood poured from her open mouth. It seemed that her tongue had been yanked out at the root. The clan juniors were covered with goosebumps, but at the same time, sympathy bloomed in their hearts. No wonder she couldn't speak. Blind and mute, how unfortunate. "Is she using sign language then? Can anyone understand?" Wei Wuxian asked. No one did. The girl stomped her feet impatiently and used her bamboo pole to draw and scrape on the ground. But she obviously wasn't raised in a scholarly family and didn't know her letters. All she had drawn was a mess of little people, making it impossible for anyone to decipher what she wanted to express. Just then, from the far end of the street came the sound of frantic running and someone panting. The phantom girl suddenly vanished, but she would probably come back on her own, so Wei Wuxian wasn't concerned. He swiftly stuck the door plank back in place and continued to spy on the outside. The other clan juniors also wanted to see what was happening, so they all squished by the door, a column of heads stacked from top to bottom, blocking the crack in the door with their eyes. The evil miasma had thinned out earlier, but now it was circulating again. They saw an unkempt figure break through the white fog, rushing their way. This man was dressed in all black and appeared to be injured, stumbling as he ran. There was a sword at his waist, also wrapped in black cloth. Lan Jinyi whispered, "Is that the smoke-masked man?" Lan Zizhui whispered back, "It shouldn't be. The smoke-masked man's form was completely different from this." There was a group of walking corpses following right behind the man, moving incredibly quickly. They caught up to him in an instant, and the man drew his sword to meet them. his sword glare bright and clear as he slashed through the miasma. Wei Wuxian cheered in his head, "Nice strike!" But once the sword made its sweep, the familiar odd spattering sound came again. Blackish red powder spouted once more from the severed limbs of the walking corpses. Surrounded and with nowhere to dodge, the man could do nothing but stand on the spot and be blasted with a face full of powder. Lan Sijue was stricken by the sight. He whispered, "Mo Xiang, that man, we—" Just then, another group of walking corpses shambled close, outflanking the man as his figure shrank into the crowd. Another sweep of his sword, and more corpse toxin erupted into the air. He gasped in yet more of it, seeming to grow unsteady on his feet. "We have to save him," Wei Wuxian said. "How are you going to do that?" Jinling questioned. "You can't go over there right now. The air is lousy with corpse toxin. You'll be poisoned if you get close." After contemplating for a moment, Wei Wuxian moved away from the window and walked to the heart of the central room. The boy's eyes also unconsciously followed him as he went. They saw a group of paper effigies of various appearances standing quietly between the two giant floral wreaths. Wei Wuxian passed by them slowly and stopped in front of a pair of paper ladies. The appearance of every paper effigy was different, but this pair seemed to have been intended to be twin sisters. Their makeup, attire, and facial features were all cast from the same mold. With crescent eyes and smiles on their faces, one could almost hear them giggling with laughter. Hair coiffed in the double ring style, they were adorned with golden bracelets, red pearl earrings, and embroidered slippers, fully suited to be maids of a great wealthy household. "Let's go with these two," Wei Wuxian said. He lightly swept his hand over one of the youth's unsheathed swords. Using the blood on his thumb, he spun around to dot 2 pairs of eyes with 4 eyeballs. He then took a step back and gave a light smile. Coy eyes and seductive wiles, red lips part to chase a smile. Ask not of good or evil done. With these final dots, let the warrior come. A gust of sinister wind blew from out of nowhere, abruptly engulfing the entire store. The boys unconsciously gripped their swords. Suddenly, the pair of paper effigy twin sisters jolted. In the next heartbeat, there came the sound of giggling laughter drifting from those bright red, painted lips. The final eyes summoning. It was as if the pair of paper effigies had seen or heard something extremely funny. They giggled like tremulous flowering boughs. Those eyes, dotted with the blood of the living, rattled in their sockets as they twirled around, painting a picture that was both extremely charming and extremely horrifying. Wei Wuxian stood in front of them and inclined his head shallowly, giving them a courteous nod. The pair of paper effigies reciprocated with a deep bow, showing him greater courtesy. Wei Wuxian pointed to the door. "Go bring the living in. Obliterate everything else." Shrill laughter shrieked from the mouths of the paper effigies. A blast of sinister wind rushed past and flung open the 2 doors of the entrance. The 2 paper effigies leapt out, shoulder to shoulder, and dove right into the mob of walking corpses. It was hard to believe that fake humans, so clearly made of paper, could possess such fierce and destructive power. Stepping with their fine embroidered shoes and fluttering their airy sleeves, they slashed off a walking corpse's arm with one sweep and sliced a head in half with another. It was as if the paper sleeves had transformed into sharp blades. That charming laughter echoed incessantly down the long street, rousing the mind yet raising the hair. It wasn't long before over a dozen walking corpses had been sliced to mangled pieces by the pair of effigies. It was a complete victory for the paper maids. Obeying the commands they were given, they picked up the weakened escapee and carried him inside before jumping out the door. The door automatically closed behind them, and they quieted down as they stood one on either side, watching the entrance like guardian lions. The clan juniors inside the house were gaping. In the past, they had learned stories of the deviant path from books and from their seniors. At the time, they couldn't understand. If it was so wicked, Why were there so many people who wished to learn it? Why were there so many imitators of the Yiling patriarch? It was only now, after seeing it with their own eyes, that they understood. The devious path had its own enticing and mysterious ways, and this final ice summoning was merely the tip of the iceberg. Once more of the youths came around, there was surprisingly no revulsion on their faces. Instead, they were filled with unconcealable excitement. They felt as though they had gained immense insight and a wealth of topics to discuss with their fellow disciples when they returned. Only Jinling still looked upset. Lan Sijue went over to help Wei Wuxian assist the man, but Wei Wuxian said, "Stay back, and be careful not to touch the corpse toxin. You might get poisoned too if it catches on your skin." By the time the paper effigies had carried the man inside, he was already drained of energy, only half conscious. But now he was a little more alert. He coughed a few times, but covered his mouth, seeming to be worried that he'd infect the others if he expelled the corpse toxin. He asked quietly, "Who are you all?" His voice sounded extremely exhausted. And he had posed the question not only because he didn't know everyone inside this house, but also because he couldn't see. A thick white ribbon was tied around the man's eyes. He, too, was probably blind. And a very good-looking blind person at that, with a straight, fine nose and thin lips of muted red. He could almost be called delicately handsome. He also appeared very young, between a youth and an adult, quite inspiring of sympathy. Wei Wuxian thought, "How come I keep running into blind people recently? Both alive and dead, both in the words of others and with my own 2 eyes." "Hey," Jinling said suddenly, "we don't know who this person is yet, or whether he's friend or foe. So why are we saving him so rashly? What if he's evil? Wouldn't we be saving a snake then?" While he wasn't wrong, it was a little awkward to be so blunt in front of the man himself. The man wasn't angry, however, and he didn't seem concerned about getting thrown out. He smiled, revealing a pair of small, white, pointed canine teeth. "The little young master is right. It's best if I leave." Jinling, who had never expected that response, was taken aback for a moment. At a loss for words, he finally settled on humphing. Lan Sijue quickly spoke up to smooth things over. "But it's also possible that this gentleman isn't malicious. In any case, ignoring the dying would be against my family's precepts." Jinling remained obstinate. "Fine. You guys are the good guys. Don't blame me if anyone croaks." Lan Jingyi began angrily, "You!" But before he could finish, his tongue tied itself. This was because he saw the sword that the man had placed on the table. Half the black cloth wrapped around the sword had slipped off, revealing its body. The sword was superbly forged, a paragon of craftsmanship. The scabbard was bronze, carved with fretwork of frost-like fractals. The body of the sword could be seen through that hollow pattern. Like silver stars twinkling in snowflake-shaped light, it had a sort of pure ice and resplendent beauty. Lan Jingyi's eyes bulged, looking like he was about to blurt something out. Wei Wuxian didn't know what he planned on screaming, but since the man had used a black cloth to cover the sword, he must not want anyone to see it. He also instinctively didn't want to alarm the man, so he smothered Lan Jingyi's mouth with a hand while placing his index finger upon his own lips, gesturing to all the other shocked youths to not say anything. Jinling mouthed 2 words, then reached out and wrote said 2 words on the dust-covered table. "Sheng Hua." "The sword, Sheng Hua?" Wei Wuxian mouthed his question soundlessly. "The sword, Sheng Hua, that belongs to Xiao Xingchen?" Jinling and the others nodded their conviction. While the youths had never seen Xiao Xingchen in person, Sheng Hua was a rare, famous sword. Not only was its spiritual power strong, but its physical appearance was also beautiful and unique. Once upon a time, it had been featured in countless editions of the Illustrated Almanac of Spiritual Swords and the Atlas of Notable Blades, making it unforgettable. Wei Wuxian mulled this information over in his head. If the sword really was Shanghua, and the man was blind, one of the boys had arrived at the same conclusion and was reaching out to touch the bandage over the man's eyes, wanting to unravel it to see if his eyes were still there. But his hand had only just touched the bandage when the man seemed to be in extreme pain. He shifted back imperceptibly, apparently very scared of others touching his eyes. The boy noticed his own impropriety and quickly withdrew his hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. The man raised his left hand, which was covered in a thin, black glove, and seemed to want to cover his eyes, even though he was afraid to touch them himself. Gentle contact already seemed to cause him unbearable pain. A thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. He replied arduously, It's fine. Still, his voice quivered. Such a display was surely enough to deduce that this man was Chao Qing-shen, who had gone missing after the case of the Chung clan of Yuyang. Chao Qing-shen still hadn't realized that his identity had been seen through. After enduring a wave of pain, he fumbled to reach for Shuang Hua. Wei Wuxian's hand moved as fast as his eyes saw, pulling up the black cloth that had slipped off. Having felt Shuang Hua, Chao Qing-shen nodded. Many thanks for rescuing me. I will take my leave. Don't go yet. You've still got corpse poisoning, Wei Wuxian said. Is it serious? Chao Qing-shen said. Very, Wei Wuxian replied. Since it's serious, then why stay? Chao Qing-shen said. It is hopeless regardless. Why not kill a few more walking corpses before I turn? Hearing he had no care for life or death, hot blood surged in the chests of the boys in the house. Who said it's hopeless? Lan Jingyi blurted out in spite of himself. Stay! We can cure you! Wei Wuxian said curiously, Me? I'm sorry, are you talking about me? He really didn't have the heart to tell the truth. Chao Qing-shen had already breathed in too much of the corpse poison. His face was tinted a faint blackish red. He was poisoned too severely, and glutinous rice congee probably wouldn't work anymore. I already killed plenty of walking corpses in the city, Chao Qing-shen said. They have been following me. More will come shortly, and endlessly they'll follow. If I stay, you'll all be overwhelmed by the mob sooner or later. Does my lord know why Yi City became this way? Wei Wuxian asked. Chao Qing-shen shook his head. No, I am merely a wandering Diao. I wandered here and entered the city for a night hunt after learning of the supernatural activity in the region. There are a great many living and walking corpses in this city. You have yet to experience the brunt force of it. Some are agile and hard to defend against, while others expel corpse toxins from their bodies after being cut down. The poison infects instantly upon contact, but if those corpses are not cut down, they tackle and bite, with an end result of poisoning you all the same. They are genuinely difficult to fight. Judging by your voice, there are many little young masters among you. Am I correct? I urge everyone to leave this place as soon as possible. Just as he had spoken, they heard the sinister giggle of the Paper Effigy sisters outside the entrance. This time, the sound of their laughter was shriller than before. Lan Jingyi leaned on the door to peek through the crack. Then he swiftly used his body to block the slit, his eyes opened wide and dumbfounded. So many! Walking corpses? Wei Wuxian asked. How many is many? I don't know, Lan Jingyi exclaimed. The entire street is full of them, maybe a few hundred, and that number is growing. I don't think those paper effigies can hold them out for much longer. If the door guarding effigies fell, all the corpses walking on the street could swarm into the shop. Cut them down, the poisoning would be imminent. In fact, the more vicious the slaughter, the faster the poison would circulate. Don't cut them down, and inevitably be torn apart or bitten to death. Sword in hand, Chao Qing-shen clearly planned on pushing through the door to go out, probably hoping to fend off as many waves of those cadavers as he could with the strength that remained in him. But his face suddenly turned purplish red, and he fell backwards onto the ground. "You just sit tight," Wei Wuxian said. "This will be resolved in a jiffy." Once more, he casually swept his index finger on his right hand over the blade of Lan Jingyi's sword. Blood dripped. "Are you going to use the final eye summoning again?" Lan Jingyi asked. "How much blood would it take for you to dot the eyes of every single effigy? How could I lend some of my blood?" The other boys immediately rolled up their sleeves. "Me too!" Wei Wuxian was caught between laughter and tears. "No need. Do you have any blank talismans?" These juniors were all still young, not trained enough to be able to draw talismans on the spot for immediate use. All the talismans that they had on them were pre-drawn. Lan Sizhui shook his head. "No. A pre-drawn one is fine too," Wei Wuxian said. Lan Sizhui retrieved a stack of yellow talismans from his Cancun pouch. Wei Wuxian took only one sheet, glanced at it, and then pressed the index and middle fingers of his right hand together as his hand powerfully glided over the cinnabar paint from top to bottom. The vibrant red blood and the scarlet cinnabar forged a brand new set of symbols. He flicked his wrist, and the red-marked yellow talisman ignited mid-air. Wei Wuxian reached out with his left hand and caught the ashes drifting from the burnt page. He clenched his fingers and looked slightly downward. As he opened his palms, he gently blew the black ashes towards a row of paper effigies. He murmured, "Wildfires cannot destroy, for life shall rise again in the spring breeze." The talisman ash stormed and whirled. A yin muscle man standing at the forefront picked up a machete that was next to his feet and slung it over his shoulder. Beside him was a sumptuously dressed paper beauty with her hair styled in a high, loose bun. She raised her right hand, nimbly flexing her long and slender fingers. She appeared to be a languid noblewoman, haughtily admiring her long nails, which were painted bright red. Next to the beauty's feet stood a golden boy and a jade maiden. The golden boy yanked mischievously at the jade maiden's braid, and the jade maiden stuck her tongue out at him in response. A long tongue, almost 30 centimeters in length, abruptly slipped out of her small mouth and poked a giant hole in the boy's chest, like a venomous snake, before it was swiftly withdrawn with one vicious movement. The golden boy opened his mouth wide, revealing 2 chilling rows of white teeth, and bit her on the arm. Just like that, the paper effigy children started fighting with each other first. 20 or 30 paper effigies started wobbling one after the other like they were working their joints, whispering to each other as they shook, while the sound of rustling undulated everywhere. They were not alive. No, they were far superior to the living. "Hold your breath," Wei Wuxian instructed. Then he sidestepped to make way for the entrance. He bowed slightly and made a gesture of invitation. The wooden doors swung violently open once more. The sweet smell of corpse toxin gushed in, and everyone immediately covered their mouths, raising their sleeves in defense. The yin muscle men let out a loud roar and lunged forward, before the rest of the paper effigies filed out. The wooden door closed anew behind the last paper effigy. "No one breathed any of it in, right?" Wei Wuxian asked the room. Everyone quickly replied, "No." Wei Wuxian helped Qiao Xingchen to his feet. He'd thought to find a place for the man to lie down, but shockingly no such place could be found, leaving him no choice but to sit on the frigid, hard, dusty ground. Qiao Xingchen was still tightly gripping his sword, Shenghua. It was only with a strenuous effort that he roused himself from his half-conscious state. He coughed a few times, his voice feeble. "Sir, that was the final eye summoning?" "My knowledge is rough at best," Wei Wuxian replied. Qiao Qingchen pondered for a moment, then smiled. That was indeed the best way to obliterate those walking corpses." He paused, then added, "However, cultivators who walk this path can easily find themselves facing mutiny from subordinate malicious ghosts and belligerent spirits.
Not even the founding father of this path, the wily patriarch Wei Wuxian, could escape that fate. It is just my personal suggestion, but if my lord is not his match, then do and be more careful in the future. Best not to use that magic unless it's absolutely necessary. Try cultivating another path.
Wei Wuxian sighed inwardly. Thank you for your exhortation. Most acclaimed cultivators made their stance on the matter very clear, drawing lines in the sand to advertise their profound hatred of certain someones. However, the fact that this dear martial uncle of his would still advise him so diplomatically, reminding him to watch out for mutiny even while he was half dead himself, it only spoke to how exceedingly gentle he was, how kind and soft-hearted. Looking at the thick layer of bandages over Chao Qingshen's eyes, and remembering what the man had gone through, Wei Wuxian couldn't help but sigh regretfully. Young juniors with scant worldly experience were usually too fascinated by the demonic path to regard it with contempt. So other than Jin Ling, who looked very upset the entire time, the other juniors were all crammed around the crack in the door to watch the spectacle unfold. Help! That effigy's woman's nails are so scary. One slash leaves 5 gashes. Why is that little girl's tongue so long and so hard? Is she a hanged ghost? That guy's so strong. I can't believe he can pick up so many walking corpses at once. He's gonna slam them down. Look, look, look! He's done it! They're all smashed! After he'd been pulled aside by Zhao Jingchen for a round of gentle counsel, Wei Wuxian grabbed the last bowl of glutinous congee on the table. Your poisoning is severe. I have something here that might be able to give you a slight reprieve, but it also might not, and it tastes quite awful. Do you want to give it a try? If you no longer wish to live, then don't worry about it. Zhao Jingchen took the bowl with 2 hands. Of course I want to live. If I might live on, then allow me to persist. However, when he lowered his head and partook, the corners of his lips started to twitch. It was only by firmly pursing his lips that he managed not to bring it right back up. It was a good while before he very politely uttered, "Thank you." Wei Wuxian turned his head. Do you guys hear that? You see that? Look what he said. You're the ones being delicate and difficult. All those complaints while eating the congee that I slaved over. Did you slave over anything? Jinling accused, besides dumping a bunch of strange things into a pot? What else did you accomplish? Zhao Jingchen said, However, upon further consideration, if I must eat this every day, then I choose to die. Jinling burst into mocking laughter without a shred of mercy, and not even Lan Sizhui could completely contain himself, letting out a Wei Wuxian looked at them, speechless, and Lan Sizhui immediately controlled himself. Right then, Lan Jingyi exclaimed happily, All right, they're all dead. We've won. Liao Jingchen quickly put down the bowl. Do not open the door yet. Be careful. There might be more. Don't put down the bowl, Wei Wuxian said. Pick it up and finish the congee. He approached the wooden door and looked out through the crack. After the inhumane slaughter, the streets were permeated with thin, white fog and purple-reddish powder. The corpse toxin was gradually dissipating, and the paper effigies patrolled leisurely up and down the street. Pieces of the walking corpses were strewn all over the ground, and when they came across bits that were still twitching, the effigies would viciously stomp down until those chunks were rendered into nothing more than puddles of blood and flesh. Beyond that, everything was still and quiet. No new walking corpses had rushed onto the scene yet. Just as Wei Wuxian was about to relax, there was a very, very light movement just above his head. The sound was almost impossible to catch. It was as though someone had darted past on the roof tiles with the speed of a bird, their steps unusually light and agile, nearly silent. Were it not for Wei Wuxian's sharp senses, he wouldn't have caught the minute sound of impact between the tiles. The movement couldn't deceive the blind either. Zhao Jingchen alerted, Above! Wei Wuxian barked, Spread out! Just as he spoke, the ceiling over the central room tore open.
Broken tiles, accumulated dust, and the scattered straw plunged down like rain. The boys had quickly dispersed, so thankfully no one was hurt. A black shadow jumped down through the gaping hole in the ceiling. This man was dressed in a set of black Taoist robes. He was tall, and his posture was straight as a pine tree. A Taoist whisk was tucked into his back, and he wielded a longsword in hand. He was coolly handsome in appearance, and with his head slightly tilted up, just so, he emanated a haughty and aloof demeanor, but his eyes had no pupils. They were pure, deadly white. A fierce corpse. Everyone present had only just managed to realize that fact when he lunged, brandishing his sword. He was aiming for Jin Ling, the one closest to him. Jin Ling drew his sword to parry, but the force behind the strike was immense, and the impact numbed his arm. If not for the extraordinary spiritual power in his own sword, Suihua, he would probably have been struck dead. His attack unsuccessful, the black-clad fierce corpse swung again, moving as smoothly and brutally as a flowing current, as if his hatred was as profound as the sea. He aimed for Jinling's arm, and in that moment of danger, Xiao Zhengqian drew his sword and helped Jinling block his attack. Doing so must have caused the poisoning to surge, and he collapsed at last, unmoving. Lan Jingyi was horrified. Is he dead or alive? I've never seen such a fierce corpse with such agility and such experience with a sword. But he trailed off because he suddenly remembered that, yes, he had. Because, of course, the ghost general was the same. Wei Wuxian's eyes had been firmly planted on the Taoist, his mind churning rapidly. He pulled out the bamboo flute tucked in his waist and played a long, shrill note, so piercing that everyone else covered their ears. When the Taoist heard the sound of the flute, his body lurched. Although the hand gripping the sword shook tremendously, in the end he still lunged. He could not be controlled, and that meant this fierce corpse had a master. Wei Wuxian dodged the lightning-fast attack, leisurely playing another tune as he sidestepped. Soon the paper effigies patrolling outside leapt onto the roof and jumped in through the gaping hole. Noticing the movement, the fierce Taoist corpse swung his sword back in 2 quick slashes. 2 paper effigies were cut into 4 pieces, top to bottom. He drew his whisk in his left hand, and it was as if thousands of those soft white threads had suddenly transformed into metal whips and poisonous thorns. A simple swing could burst skulls and sever limbs. An accidental brush could turn a bystander into a sieve, pouring blood like water. Though his hands were full, Wei Wuxian called out, "Don't come over here! Stay in your corner!" Then he continued issuing commands, the music of the flute whimsical and flighty and marked with furious chords. Although the fierce Taoist was fighting with both hands, endless paper effigies jumped down from above, surrounding and attacking him. If he struck here, there'd be more there. Kill the one in front, and more would come from the back. His strength alone was inadequate. Suddenly, a yin muscle man dropped from above and grappled him, stomping down on his shoulder and pushing him to the ground. 3 more yin muscle men followed right behind, leaping down through the hole to pile onto him one after the other. Legend told of the extraordinary strength of yin muscle men, so their crafters usually added extra weight to the effigies when crafting them. When wild ghosts were summoned to possess these bodies, each and every one became heftier than the last. Having one slam into you was already much like having a mountain bear down on your head. With 4 at once, it was amazing that the Taoist-robed fierce corpse didn't puke his innards out at the impact. He was pinned completely in place, unable to move a muscle. Wei Wuxian walked over, observing a section of damaged clothing on his back. When he flattened the tear to examine further, a thin, narrow gash could be seen by the corpse's left shoulder blade. "Flip him over," Wei Wuxian ordered. The 4 yin musclemen flipped the Taoist over to face the ceiling, making it easier for him to examine the man. Wei Wuxian reached out with the fingers that he had cut earlier and smeared them over the lips of each of the 4 paper effigies as a reward. The Yin muscle men stuck out their red paper tongues and cherished the blood with slow licks, seemingly savoring the delicacy. Only then did Wei Wuxian look down and continue his inspection. The area near the Taoist's heart seemed to have sustained the same damage as his back, the same tear, the same narrow gash. It was as if he had died from being stabbed through the heart. The fierce corpse had been struggling all the while, a continuous low growl emitting from its throat. Jet black blood trickled from the corners of his mouth. Wei Wuxian squeezed his cheeks, forcing him to open his mouth, and looked inside. It seemed that the man's tongue had also been pulled out at the root. Blind and tongueless. Blind and tongueless. Why were these 2 characteristics appearing so frequently? Wei Wuxian examined the man for a while, coming to the conclusion that this fierce corpse resembled Wen Ning when he was controlled by those long black nails. Having formed this theory, he reached out, groping near the corpse's temples, and actually managed to find 2 small metal nubs. These black nails were made to control high-level fierce corpses, causing them to lose their mind and their ability to think. Wei Wuxian didn't know this fierce corpse's identity or character, so he couldn't recklessly pull the nails out. He must be properly interrogated, Wei Wuxian thought. But since his tongue was already gone, this fierce corpse wouldn't be able to speak even if he had his senses returned to him. He asked the juniors, "Who among you has studied inquiry?" Lan Sizhui raised his hand. "Me, I have." "Did you bring your guqian?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Yes," Lan Sizhui answered. He immediately retrieved a guqian, simple but lustrous in color, from his qinkun pouch. Wei Wuxian noticed that the guqian seemed to be brand new. "How's your guqian language? Have you used it in practical settings like this before? Will the invited spirits lie?" Lan Jingyi cut in. "Han Wanjun said that Sizhui's guqian language was acceptable." If Lan Wenzhi had said acceptable, then it must be acceptable. He wouldn't have exaggerated, nor played it down. Wei Wuxian relaxed. Lan Sizhui said, "Han Wanjun told me to practice quality, not quantity. The invited spirits can choose not to answer, but they definitely cannot lie, so whatever they answer will be the truth." "Let's get started then," Wei Wuxian said. The guqian was placed on the ground above the Taoist's head. Lan Sizhui sat down, the hems of his robes spreading neatly out around him. He tried 2 notes and then nodded. "First question. Ask who he is," Wei Wuxian said. Lan Sizhui thought for a moment, then mouthed the incantation to himself before daring to pluck out the first verse. A good moment later, the strings vibrated, and 2 notes blasted forth like barracks splitting. Lan Sizhui widened his eyes. Lan Jingyi urged, "What did he say?" "Song Lan," Lan Sizhui said. "The best friend and fellow cultivator of Zhao Zhengchen, Song Lan?" Everyone turned to look at the unconscious Zhao Zhengchen on the ground. Lan Sizhui muttered, "I wonder if he knows that this is Song Lan." Jinling also hushed his voice. "Probably not. He's blind and Song Lan is mute. Not to mention he became a mindless, fierce corpse, so best if he doesn't." Wei Wuxian said, "Second question. Ask who killed him." Lan Sizhui played a verse seriously. This time, the silence lasted 3 times longer than before. Just when they thought Song Lan's soul wasn't willing to answer the question, the strings trembled and 3 notes resounded with profound pain. "Impossible," Lan Sizhui blurted. "What did he say?" Wei Wuxian asked. Lan Sizhui was incredulous. "He said, Zhao Zhengchen." The one who killed Song Lan was Zhao Zhengchen? They had only asked 2 questions. Who could have imagined that each answer would be more shocking than the last? Jinling was dubious. "You played wrong, right?" Lan Sizhui replied, "Who art thou, and who killed thee? are the easiest and most frequently asked questions during the session of inquiry. They're the first and second verses that everyone who studies inquiry learns. I've practiced them at least 1,000 times, and I checked repeatedly before playing them. I most certainly did not make a mistake. Well, either your inquiry was played wrong, or you're misinterpreting the Gutian language. Jinling determined, adamant. Lan Zhengrui shook his head. If the notes were not wrong, then misinterpretation is even more impossible. Zhao Zhengchen is an uncommon phrase or name, rarely heard from invited spirits. If he had answered with a different name and I misinterpret it, there's no way that it would just so happen to be this name. Jinling mumbled. Sang Long went to find the missing Zhao Zhengchen, but Zhao Zhengchen killed him. Why would he kill his best friend? He doesn't seem like the type to do that. Don't worry about all that right now, Wei Wuxian said. Sidri, ask the third question. Who is controlling him? Lan Sidri's face was serious, and he didn't dare breathe too hard as he played the third verse. Many eyes were glued to the strings, waiting for Sung Lan's answer. Then they heard Lan Sidri interpret the response, one word at a time. The one behind you. Everyone's head shot up. Zhao Xingchen, who had been lying on the ground unconscious, was now sitting up with one hand propping up his cheek as he smiled at them. He raised his black-gloved left hand and snapped his fingers. End of part 2.